He was in the electric chair and his last request was to see his horse, and nobody understood. They called it madness, cheap manipulation, a condemned man's act. But seconds before the execution, the truth explodes. He was innocent all along. Now those who screamed for justice try to forget, while the horse became a symbol of what remained human in that story. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The courtroom was packed that June afternoon. The air seemed heavy, charged with the tension of a trial that had mobilized the entire small town of Golden Ridge in rural Kentucky. Sitting in the defendant's chair, Anthony Carson, a man in his 40s with sunken eyes and hands calloused from fieldwork, kept his gaze fixed on the judge. His face, marked by the sun and worries, revealed a silent dignity, even under the weight of the accusations he faced. "The defendant will rise to hear the sentence," announced Judge Richard Mendoza, a severe man known for the rigidity of his decisions. Anthony rose slowly. His legs seemed fragile after months in detention, away from the open air and the fields he loved so much. Beside him, his attorney, Claire Roberts, a young professional who had accepted the case despite public opinion, also stood up. The fatigue was visible on her face after weeks trying to prove her client's innocence in a case that had divided the town. This court, after considering all evidence presented, declares the defendant, Anthony Carson, guilty of the charge of misappropriation of the Bradford family lands and the resulting environmental damages, pronounced the judge solemnly. A murmur spread through the room. Some people nodded, satisfied with the result. Others lowered their gaze, uncomfortable. In the front row, Helen Bradford, the owner of the disputed lands, an elegant and influential lady in the region, maintained an impassive expression, although her eyes revealed a gleam of triumph. Claire immediately requested to speak. "Your Honor, I request that our appeal be recorded. The evidence presented by the prosecution is circumstantial and based on documents whose authenticity we have questioned since the beginning of the process." The judge nodded, granting the right to appeal, but his expression made it clear that he considered the case closed. The defendant will remain in custody until the appeal is heard. The session is adjourned. As he was being led out of the courtroom, Anthony turned to Claire. "Please, just one favor. I want to see my horse, Storm. He's been alone at the farm since I was arrested." Claire nodded, surprised by the simple and touching request. "I'll do my best, Anthony." At the courthouse exit, Claire was approached by Rachel Sanders, a journalist, from the small local newspaper, who had followed the case from the beginning. Unlike other reporters who seemed satisfied with the official version of facts, Rachel showed a genuine interest in unraveling the contradictions of the case. "Ms. Roberts, what happens now? Do you have any strategy for the appeal?" asked Rachel, holding her recorder close. "We'll continue fighting for the truth," Claire replied simply, "and I'm going to make an unusual request to the judge. My client wants to see his horse." Rachel raised her eyebrows, intrigued. "A horse? In the middle of all this?" For Anthony, it's not just an animal, it's family. In the days that followed, Anthony's request generated diverse reactions in town. Some considered it absurd, others saw in it a touch of humanity. Claire persisted, arguing that there were no legal precedents preventing the visit and that it would be a humanitarian gesture while they awaited the appeal hearing. Surprisingly, Judge Mendoza accepted the request, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps from a spark of compassion he rarely showed. A small enclosure was improvised in the municipal prison yard, and Storm, a vigorous chestnut with gleaming coat, was brought there by Jack, a longtime employee of Anthony's farm, and one of the few who remained loyal to him. The meeting between man and animal was witnessed by guards, some prisoners observing from barred windows, and by Rachel, who had obtained authorization to record the moment. When Anthony approached the enclosure, Storm neighed loudly, immediately recognizing his owner. The horse approached, and Anthony stroked his mane with trembling hands. "Are you well, my friend?" "Are they taking good care of you?" murmured Anthony, resting his forehead against the animal's neck. Storm responded with a soft neigh, as if understanding every word. Rachel photographed discreetly, surprised by her own emotion witnessing that moment of genuine connection. Something in that scene made her question the narrative that had dominated the town. How could a man capable of such affection be the villain everyone described? In town, news of the meeting spread quickly. Mrs. Cecilia, an elderly lady who lived near Anthony's farm, began to visit the horse in the improvised enclosure. Although she had never been close to Anthony, something in the animal's loyalty touched her deeply. "Animals know," she commented to Rachel during one of these visits. "They recognize who is truly good. They don't let themselves be deceived like we humans do." Claire, meanwhile, worked tirelessly on the appeal. There were inconsistencies in the process that had bothered her from the beginning. The documents that supposedly proved Anthony had falsified property titles seemed conveniently perfect. The prosecution's witnesses were all somehow linked to the Bradford family, and Helen Bradford seemed strangely rushed to take possession of the land, already announcing plans for a major real estate development in the area. "Something doesn't fit," Claire said to Rachel during a conversation in the lawyer's small office. "Helen Bradford claims the lands always belonged to her family, but then why are there no records of this before 5 years ago? And why the rush to develop the area now?" Rachel nodded, taking notes. Her journalistic intuition told her there was a bigger story to be discovered. "I'll investigate further. The Bradford family has a lot of power here, but that doesn't mean they're above the truth." Meanwhile, in prison, Anthony received an unexpected visit. Louis Miller, a neighboring farmer with whom he had serious disagreements in the past over water disputes. To everyone's surprise, Louis offered to look after Anthony's lands while he was imprisoned. "We don't agree on much, Anthony, but I know you love that land like nobody else. So I won't let them destroy it while you can't defend it," said Louis, extending his hand for a shake. Anthony, moved, accepted the gesture. "Take good care of the rest of the animals and plant the golden trumpet tree seeds I kept in the barn. I always wanted to see that hill covered with yellow flowers in spring." Louis promised he would do exactly that, sealing an unexpected reconciliation born of shared suffering and respect for the land. In town, opinions began to slowly change. Visits by local children to the horse in the prison enclosure became frequent. They brought carrots and apples for Storm and asked disconcerting questions to adults. "If Mr. Carson is a bad person, why does his horse love him so much?" Or, "Are adults always right when they judge someone?" Mrs. Cecilia, now a constant presence at the enclosure, became a kind of informal spokesperson for Anthony. She told stories about how he had helped many residents during a major flood years ago, or how he maintained sustainable practices on his farm long before it became common. As Anthony's figure gradually transformed in the community's eyes, Rachel Sanders deepened her investigation. The journalist now dedicated all her spare hours researching the Bradford family's history and the strange circumstances that had led to the dispute over Anthony's lands. On a rainy afternoon, Rachel visited the Municipal Registry, an old colonial-style building where the town's most important records were kept. The place was almost empty, with only the old clerk, Mr. Gerald, organizing yellow documents in metal files. "I need to consult the property records for Horizon Farm," explained Rachel, referring to Anthony's lands by the name everyone knew in the region. Mr. Gerald adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses. "Those records were recently reviewed for the court case. Mrs. Helen Bradford and her lawyers spent days here." Something in the way he said this caught Rachel's attention. "And before that, when was the last time anyone consulted these documents?" The old clerk frowned, thoughtful. "Now that you mention it, it was strange. Nobody was interested in those documents for decades. Then suddenly, about 5 years ago, the Bradford family lawyer appeared, wanting to do a complete survey of all properties in the region. With Mr. Gerald's permission, Rachel began to examine the registry books. At first, everything seemed to confirm the official version. The documents showed that the area had originally belonged to the Bradford family in the early last century. But there was something strange about the dates and signatures. Some records looked newer than others, although they were supposedly from the same period. "Mr. Gerald, are these books the originals?" asked Rachel, intrigued. The old man hesitated. "Well, there was a flood about 6 years ago. Some documents were damaged and needed to be restored or remade based on copies. And who supervised this process? The law firm that represents the Bradford family offered assistance. It was a gesture of goodwill to the community. Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine. That could explain a lot. In prison, Anthony received increasingly frequent visits. Claire, his lawyer, brought news of the appeal and the growing community support. Lewis Miller appeared weekly to report on the state of the farm and animals. "I planted those golden trumpet tree seeds you asked for," Lewis told him during one of these visits, "and I discovered something interesting while digging holes for the seedlings. There are old boundary markings on your property, different from those on current maps." Anthony's eyes lit up. "My grandfather always talked about that. He said the original boundaries of the farm went all the way to the river, not just to the road as the new maps show." Louis nodded, excited. "Exactly. And I found a stone with inscriptions dated 1923 with your family's name." Claire, who was listening attentively, intervened. "This could be crucial for the appeal. If we can prove there was tampering with the property boundaries." "We need that stone," decided Anthony. "It's physical proof that my family is the true owner of those lands for generations." Louis promised to photograph the stone and try to find a way to bring it as evidence for the court. Although he knew it would be difficult, since technically the lands were under judicial dispute and any removal of objects could be considered illegal. Meanwhile, at the Bradford family estate, a tense meeting was taking place behind closed doors. Helen Bradford, an elegant woman of 60, impeccably dyed hair and haughty posture, was arguing with her son Marcus, an ambitious young businessman, and with Richard Allen, her longtime lawyer. "Public opinion is changing," warned Richard, concerned. "That horse story has generated unexpected sympathy, and now there are rumors that the journalist is investigating the registry records." Helen made a gesture of disdain. "Let them investigate. All documents are in order." "Mother," interrupted Marcus, visibly nervous, "maybe we should reconsider the project. There are other areas we could develop without all this controversy." "Absurd," Helen slapped the table with the palm of her hand. "Those lands are strategic for our project. The resort will only work if we have access to the spring. That's on Carson's property. We've worked too hard to get here and I won't back down now." What none of them noticed was that Martha, the maid serving coffee during the meeting, was listening attentively to everything. Martha was a second cousin of Jack, Anthony's loyal employee, and had long suspected there was something wrong with the Bradford family's actions. That same night, Martha sought out Jack and revealed what she had heard. "They're desperate for the spring, Jack. They talked about a resort and that without the water from Mr. Carson's farm, the project won't go forward." Jack immediately took the information to Lewis and Claire, who began to understand the real reason behind the dispute over the lands. It wasn't just a matter of property, but of the region's most valuable resource, water. In town, the enclosure where Storm was housed became an unexpected meeting point. Mrs. Cecilia, now helped by a Daisiba group of ladies who previously criticized Anthony, cared for the animal with devotion. Children from the local school came to feed him and listen to stories about Anthony and his farm. "He was always a good man," Mrs. Cecilia told a group of fascinated children. "When my late husband fell ill, it was Anthony who helped us with medicine and food, never asking for anything in return." One of the children, Peter, the local pharmacist's son, innocently asked, "Then why is he in prison if he's good?" Mrs. Cecilia sighed, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes people make mistakes, and sometimes it's easier to believe what everyone is saying than to seek the truth for yourself." Rachel, who spent more and more time at the enclosure, documenting the transformation of the community, approached Peter after the conversation. "Do you know Anthony, Peter?" The boy nodded. "He always brought medicinal plants to my dad at the pharmacy. Dad says Anthony knows nature better than any book." This information gave Rachel a new clue. If Anthony was known for his knowledge of medicinal plants and for preserving nature on his farm, that would explain his care for the spring. And if the spring was the real reason for the dispute, she needed to find out more about the Bradford family's plans for the area. Through contacts in the urban planning department, Rachel gained access to the preliminary designs for the resort that the Bradford family planned to build. The plans revealed a luxury development that, if realized, would consume an enormous amount of water and drastically alter the local ecosystem. "This explains everything," murmured Rachel, examining the documents. "They don't just want the land, they want to control the water." Claire, upon receiving this information, began to reformulate her strategy for the appeal. If she could prove that the dispute was actually about the spring, not the property itself, and if she could demonstrate that there had been manipulation of documents, she would have a real chance of reversing the sentence. The lawyer organized a discreet meeting with Lewis, Jack, Rachel, and some other supporters of Anthony in the small back room of the municipal library. In the center of the table, they spread old maps of the region, photographs of the stone with inscriptions found by Louis, and copies of the resort designs. "What we need now," explained Claire, "is to find witnesses who can confirm that the Carsons were always the legitimate owners of those lands. Elderly people who know the history of the region and can discredit the documents presented by the Bradfords." "My grandfather can help," offered Jack. "He's 92 years old and worked on farms in the region his whole life. He knows every piece of land and who owned what around here. And we need to discover exactly how the documents were altered," added Rachel. "Mr. Gerald mentioned a flood that damaged the original records, but I can't help thinking it was too convenient." Louis, who had been listening in silence until then, spoke. "I know someone who worked at the Bradfords law firm at the time. He moved to the capital after a nasty fight with Richard Allen. Maybe he knows something." While the group strategized, Anthony spent his days in prison trying to maintain hope. The daily visits to the enclosure to see Storm were what kept him strong. The bond between man and animal seemed to strengthen each day, to the admiration of the guards who had initially mocked the idea. One of these guards, Sam, who had previously treated Anthony with contempt, began to question his own convictions. "I've never seen anything like it," he commented to a colleague as they watched Anthony and Storm. "A bad man doesn't inspire this kind of loyalty." In the community, sentiment began to change more evidently. People who previously avoided talking about the case now openly discussed the possibility that Anthony was innocent. Some even questioned the power that the Bradford family had exerted over the town for generations. Tension grew as the appeal hearing approached. Helen Bradford, feeling she was losing control of the situation, called an emergency meeting with her lawyer. "We need to act quickly," declared Helen Bradford to her lawyer, Richard, as they walked through the immaculate gardens of her mansion. "Use your contacts in the court to expedite the appeal hearing before they find more evidence." Richard seemed uncomfortable. "Helen, we're treading on dangerous ground. If it's discovered that we manipulated official documents, nobody will discover anything if you do your job right," Helen cut him off. "Remember how much your family—" "Those mine. Your father would be in prison if my husband hadn't interfered in that case 30 years ago." The veiled threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Richard swallowed hard and nodded. He knew he was caught in a web from which he could not easily escape. Meanwhile, Louis Miller traveled to Chicago in search of Carl Vance, the former employee of the Bradfords law firm. After days of searching, he found him working in a small legal office in the city center. "I don't have good memories of that time," confessed Carl after hearing Louis's story. "Richard Allen asked me to remake some documents after the flood, but I soon realized it wasn't just restoration. We were creating new records, backdating papers." "Do you have any proof of this?" Carl hesitated, looking nervously around. "I kept some original drafts in for safety. I never thought they would one day be useful for doing justice." From a safe hidden behind a painting, Carl removed a yellowed folder. Inside were Richard's handwritten notes with clear instructions on how to alter dates and names in the property records. "This could save an innocent man," said Louis, moved. Back in Golden Ridge, Rachel was making progress in her own investigation. She had discovered that the supposed flood at the registry had happened under suspicious circumstances, during a weekend when the security system was deactivated for maintenance. Even more intriguing was her conversation with Arnold Costa, a retired engineer who had worked in the town's water department for decades. The spring on Carson's property isn't just any spring," explained Arnold, showing Rachel old hydrographic maps. "It's part of an underground aquifer that feeds the entire region. In studies we did in the 80s, we discovered that the water has unique mineral properties. At the time, the Bradford family tried to buy the area, but Anthony's grandfather refused all offers. So they've known the value of that water for decades." "Certainly. And with the current water crisis, a source like that is worth more than gold. A resort with exclusive access to this water would be a billion-dollar enterprise." Rachel felt the pieces of the puzzle fitting together. It wasn't just a luxury resort that the Bradfords were planning, but possibly a mineral water business that could yield fortunes while depleting a vital resource for the entire community. In prison, Anthony received an unexpected visit. Marcus Bradford, Helen's son. The young man seemed nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder as if afraid of being seen there. "I don't have much time," he said hurriedly. "I came because I can't stand being part of this farce anymore. My mother has been obsessed with those lands for years, especially after analyses confirmed the value of the water." Anthony observed the young man cautiously. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's gone too far. When it started, it was just a real estate project. Now I realize we're destroying an innocent man's life out of greed." Marcus handed Anthony a flash drive. "Here are the confidential geological studies and emails between my mother and international investors. They prove that the real interest is the water, not the land." As soon as Marcus left, Anthony called a guard and asked to contact Claire immediately. The flash drive was a time bomb in the right hands. Claire gathered her group of allies again, now strengthened with the new evidence. Carl's documents proving fraud in the property records, Rachel's discoveries about the aquifer, and the confidential files provided by Marcus. "We have enough not only to win the appeal, but possibly to open a case against the Bradford family for falsification of public documents," explained Claire, examining the materials. "Should we go to the press with this?" asked Jack. Rachel shook her head. "Not yet. Helen has influence over the main media outlets in the region. We need to ensure that the evidence reaches the court directly." What they didn't know was that Helen was already aware of her son's betrayal. One of the mansion's maids had witnessed Marcus's furtive exit with documents from the office and, fearing reprisals, told her employer. That same night, an explosive discussion took place at the Bradford mansion. Screams could be heard by the staff in the garden. In the end, Marcus left carrying suitcases, visibly shaken. "You've chosen the wrong side, my son," Helen said coldly from the door. "Don't come back until you realize your mistake." Marcus got into his car and drove off, but instead of going to his apartment in town, he drove to the small inn where Louis was staying. It was time to fully ally himself with those seeking the truth. The next morning, Helen convened an emergency meeting with the town's main businessmen and politicians, all somehow connected to her interests. In a private room at the local country club, she laid out the situation. "We are facing a threat to the progress of Golden Ridge," she declared with rehearsed firmness. "Subversive elements are trying to prevent an investment that will bring prosperity to all." The mayor, Paul Montgomery, a middle-aged man who owed his position to the financial support of the Bradfords, spoke up. "What do you suggest we do, Mrs. Bradford? We need to show unity, make the population understand that the Carson case isn't about one man, but about the future of the town. We'll organize a demonstration in favor of economic development. We'll show that the people are with us." Some nodded, others seemed uncomfortable, but no one dared to openly disagree. Helen had always known how to use others' fear and ambition to her advantage. In prison, visits to Anthony increased each day. In addition to Claire, Louis, Rachel, and Jack, other residents now appeared, bringing small gifts and words of support. Most surprising was when the town's priest, Father Frank Oliver, previously neutral about the case, came to offer solidarity. "I've spent too much time in silence," confessed the priest. "I've seen injustices happen in the name of progress and didn't take a stand. But your horse taught me a lesson about loyalty and courage." Storm had become a kind of local celebrity. Children from the school made drawings of the horse, which were affixed to the walls of the improvised enclosure. Mrs. Cecilia coordinated a group of volunteers who took turns caring for the animal, and keeping the place clean. One of these volunteers was Bethany, Mrs. Cecilia's granddaughter, an environmental law student who had returned to town after completing her studies in the capital. Bethany began to help Claire with the environmental aspects of the case, especially related to the aquifer and spring protection laws. If we can prove that the real objective is the commercial exploitation of water, we can activate state and federal environmental agencies, explained Bethany during a meeting. There are specific legislations that protect water resources of this type. Claire nodded, excited about the reinforcement. That would give us a second battlefront in case the appeal isn't enough. The date for the appeal hearing was finally set for 2 weeks later. To everyone's surprise, it would be much earlier than expected. Claire immediately suspected the influence of the Bradfords, trying to expedite the process before all the new evidence could be properly organized. "They're pressuring the court," she told the group. "We need to work twice as hard to prepare everything in time." During this period, something unexpected happened. Helen Bradford suffered a collapse during a meeting with investors. She was rushed to the local hospital, where doctors diagnosed a minor heart attack caused by extreme stress. The news spread quickly through town. Marcus, despite his break with his mother, rushed to the hospital. There he found Richard Allen visibly shaken. "You need to talk to your mother," said the lawyer in a low voice. "Things are getting out of control. She's obsessed with this case, doesn't think of anything else." Marcus entered the hospital room where Helen, pale and fragile, seemed much smaller and older, connected to monitoring machines. "You came back," she murmured in a weak voice. "I'm your son, Mother." "Of course. I came back." Marcus held her hand, feeling a wave of contradictory emotions. "We need to talk about the Carson case." "I won't give up." Helen tried to sit up, but weakness forced her back against the pillows. "That water is the future of our family." "It's not worth your health, Mother, nor the injustice against an innocent man." Helen looked away. For a brief moment, something like doubt crossed her face. "You don't understand. I made a promise to your father before he passed, that I would complete what he started, that I would make the Bradfords the most powerful family in this region." Marcus then understood that it wasn't just greed driving his mother, but a distorted loyalty to his father's memory. What if there was another way? A partnership, perhaps, where everyone would win? Helen closed her eyes, exhausted. "It's too late for that. It's never too late to do the right thing, Mother." Meanwhile, in the streets of Golden Ridge, two opposing movements were gaining strength. On one side, Anthony's supporters organized vigils in front of the prison, with signs demanding justice and a review of the case. On the other, groups linked to the Bradfords' economic interests promoted meetings defending the resort project as the town's economic salvation. The morning of the appeal hearing dawned with a sky heavy with grey clouds. A crowd gathered in front of the courthouse, divided into two distinct groups. On one side, Anthony's supporters with banners asking for justice. On the other, people with signs defending the economic progress promised by the Bradford Resort. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Claire had spent the night reviewing every detail of her argument. At her side, Anthony maintained the serene posture that characterized him, although anxiety was visible in his tired eyes. In the front row of the audience, Rachel prepared to document every moment. Mrs. Cecilia was there, along with Bethany and several other residents who now openly supported Anthony's cause. Louis and Jack, sitting side by side, exchanged tense looks. Helen Bradford's entrance caused a stir. Still visibly debilitated after her health scare, she walked supported by a cane, with Richard Allen at her side. What surprised everyone was seeing Marcus entering right behind, deliberately keeping his distance from his mother and the lawyer. Judge Mendoza entered the room and declared the session open. Claire was the first to speak, presenting the new evidence obtained. Carl Vance's documents proving tampering with the property records, the hydrographic maps showing the importance of the aquifer, and, most impactful, the confidential files, provided by Marcus revealing the real plans for commercial exploitation of the water. Richard Allen tried to contest the admissibility of the evidence, arguing it was obtained by questionable means, but the judge allowed it to be considered given the gravity of the allegations. Your Honor, concluded Claire with a firm voice, what we have here is not just a case of land dispute, but a systematic attempt to defraud public records to appropriate a vital natural resource for the entire community. Anthony Carson is not the criminal in this story, but rather the victim of a conspiracy driven by greed. Richard was preparing to counter-argue when something unexpected happened. Marcus Bradford rose from his seat and asked permission to speak. Your Honor, I would like to testify. A murmur ran through the room. Helen looked at her son with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Richard tried to prevent it, but the judge, intrigued, allowed the testimony. My name is Marcus Bradford, he began with a trembling but determined voice, and I come here to confess my participation in and knowledge of my family's plans to illegally appropriate Anthony Carson's lands. The silence that followed was so dense that one could hear the collective breathing of the audience. Marcus then related in detail how his mother had orchestrated the falsification of documents, how the real interest was the aquifer and not the lands themselves, and how he himself had participated in meetings with international investors interested in commercializing the water. I do this not to harm my family, he concluded, looking directly at his mother, but because I believe it's time to break this cycle of lies and seek a form of prosperity that doesn't depend on destroying innocent people's lives. Helen, pale and trembling, rose with difficulty. Traitor, she shouted before Richard could contain her. You're destroying your father's legacy. The judge called for order in the room as Helen was assisted and taken out by medical attendants, visibly shaken. After a brief interruption, the session resumed. Richard Allen, visibly uncomfortable, tried to minimize Marcus's declarations, suggesting that the young man was emotionally disturbed by his mother's health, but the damage was done. Judge Mendoza announced that he would need a recess to consider all the new evidence before delivering his decision. The session was suspended for 2 hours. During the recess, the courthouse yard became the scene of intense discussions. People who previously defended the Bradford project now questioned whether they had been manipulated. Mayor Paul Montgomery, sensing the change in winds, discreetly distanced himself from Helen's supporters. Rachel took the opportunity to interview Marcus, who revealed even more surprising details about the water exploitation plans. The resort was just a facade, he explained. The real business would be bottling and exporting the water, which has rare mineral properties. Studies showed it has medicinal potential, but intensive exploitation would end up depleting the aquifer in less than a decade, affecting the entire region's water supply. When the session resumed, Judge Mendoza seemed to have aged years in the few hours of recess. With a grave voice, he announced his decision. This court, after careful consideration of the new evidence presented, recognizes that there was a serious judicial error in the conviction of Anthony Carson. The evidence clearly demonstrates that the documents that formed the basis of the accusation were fraudulently manipulated, and that the real motivation behind this dispute goes far beyond a simple question of property. A collective sigh ran through the room. Therefore, I revoke the previous sentence and declare Anthony Carson innocent of all charges. Furthermore, I recognize his legal right over the disputed lands, as proven by the original records and testimonies presented. Spontaneous applause erupted. Claire hugged Anthony, who remained in a state of shock, silent tears running down his time-marked face. Additionally, continued the judge, I order the opening of a criminal investigation into the allegations of falsification of public documents and procedural fraud. All involved will be duly investigated. When Anthony finally left the courthouse, free for the first time in months, a crowd awaited him. But he only had eyes for one figure, Storm, whom Mrs. Cecilia and Jack had brought there. The reunion between man and animal, now without bars between them, brought tears even to the most cynical. Anthony embraced the horse's neck, burying his face in the soft mane. Let's go home, friend, he murmured. We're finally going home. In the days that followed, the town of Golden Ridge began a slow healing process. Helen Bradford, shaken by the events and her son's betrayal, withdrew to a rest clinic in the capital. Richard Allen faced a disciplinary process at the Bar Association for his unethical conduct. Marcus, on the other hand, surprised everyone by seeking reconciliation with Anthony. "I want to learn from you," he said during a visit to Horizon Farm, now returned to its rightful owner. "Learn how to care for the land, how to preserve the water that is so precious to all of us." Anthony, after a moment of hesitation, accepted the offer. The land teaches more than any professor, and everyone deserves a second chance. Together, they began to develop an alternative project, a research center on sustainable water use practices, combined with a small spa that would use the medicinal properties of the water in a controlled and ecologically responsible manner. Bethany, Mrs. Cecilia's granddaughter, joined the project, bringing her knowledge of environmental law. Over time, an unexpected partnership flourished between her and Marcus, uniting technical knowledge with a genuine desire for reparation. Luis and Anthony, former rivals, strengthened their renewed friendship. Together, they expanded the golden trumpet tree plantations that now colored the hills with yellow, orange, and purple flowers during spring, becoming a natural tourist attraction that benefited the entire community. Rachel documented the entire transformation in a series of award-winning reports that drew national attention to issues of environmental and social justice. Her work inspired young journalists to seek the truth beyond appearances and official versions. Claire, recognized for her persistence and courage, began receiving invitations to lecture at law schools about professional ethics and restorative justice. She often brought with her the story of Anthony and Storm as an example of the power of truth and loyalty. As for Storm, the horse now enjoyed a wide green pasture, running freely under the sun. Children from the local school regularly visited the farm to feed him carrots and apples, while Anthony told stories about the importance of protecting nature and trusting in justice, even when it seems slow to arrive. On a golden autumn afternoon, 2 years after the trial, Anthony was sitting on the porch of his house watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Storm grazed peacefully nearby, occasionally raising his head as if checking that his human friend was still there. Mrs. Cecilia, who now visited him regularly to share coffee and stories of the past, smiled as she observed the scene. "You know, Anthony, I've always believed that animals see something that we humans often forget to see. And what would that be, Mrs. Cecilia?" he asked, although he already suspected the answer. "The true essence of people. They don't let themselves be deceived by appearances or pretty words. They feel who we really are." She paused, watching Storm slowly approach the porch. "Your horse never doubted you, not for a second. And in the end, he taught an entire town the same lesson." Anthony smiled, extending his hand to stroke Storm's muzzle. "The truth always finds a way, doesn't it? Sometimes it takes time, but it always comes to light." The sun finally set beyond the hills covered with golden trumpet trees, while man and horse remained side by side, silhouettes cut against the purple-tinged sky, a living symbol of loyalty, perseverance, and justice that would forever be etched in the memory of Golden Ridge. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Anthony and Storm has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here, clicking to the left. If you like this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the strength of true bonds. Don't miss our upcoming content.